next session is fundraising journey of a woman entrepreneur. It's all eventually coming down to money, 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 right? How do I get my money? Is it my money? Is it someone else's money? Why will someone else put their money? And the whole point, something like Anisha said earlier as well, that you've got different stages and different people in the system who are liable to make your project and make your dream a totality of fulfillment. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, our last session for today, before you move into networking, is about fundraising journey of a woman entrepreneur. यार idea तो है, and what an idea, sir जी, मगर पैसा कहाँ से आएगा? Ladies and gentlemen, starting your fundraiser journey is an exhilarating process. You have nurtured the company, put the right leadership team in place. You spent countless hours ensuring that your company will succeed. But as that company grows, there comes a time when every CEO wonders if it is time to seek funding from the outside. This is not always an easy task, especially if you are a female founder. And I know we've spoken about this earlier in the day. Some people are privileged and the others may not be. It's not the same fabric that we can assess, both upbringings and both dreams on. To share actionable advice for entrepreneurs about how do they actually embark on their first fundraising journey, we have a really fun conversation coming up next. So it is my honor to invite our moderator to begin with, Professor Sabarinathan, Associate Professor, Finance and Accounting, Chairperson, Finance and Accounting. And he's going to be joined by our speaker, Rashmi Daga, founder and CEO of Freshmenu. So I'm going to go off screen and allow these two wonderful people to take over. Enjoy the session.
Hello, Professor. Good to see you.
Hi, Rashmi. Likewise. Yeah. So, are we live or are we waiting to go live? Do you know? You're live. Okay, great. So, good evening. Namaskara to all of you who are all online. I have a relatively simple task this evening. I have to introduce Rashmi, which is not easy, but then I let Rashmi take the floor. But just to sort of give some structure to the conversation with Rashmi, I will start off with a few questions of mine, and then we'll throw open the floor to the audience to ask Rashmi the questions they want to ask. The questions I understand will be curated by a moderator, but do feel free to send in your questions, and Rashmi will try and take up as many as she can. But before that, I should tell you a little bit about Rashmi. So Rashmi I was looking at her career path, and she's one person who seems to have crafted her career very carefully from the word go, right? Engineer from DC, Delhi College of Engineering, and then IIMA, PGP, and then she worked with IBM as a business development manager, then with Johnson & Johnson as a regional sales head, and then she got into the startup world, started her journey there with Tuta Vista, where she was VP operations, and she seems to have tried her hand at starting up in between, started something called AFDAY, and from there she went on to become SVP sales, and finally she got back into entrepreneurship, leaving her role as sales head for Ola. So, anybody who sees this career path would know here is one person who seemed to know where she wanted to head. And so hats off to her for that.
It's the other way around. Someone who was always wanting to learn more and kept jumping industries.
Right.
If you notice, every profile is a different industry.
Right. And that's precisely what makes me think that it's the other way around, whatever I said. Now, the only crib I have, at the risk of sounding very parochial, is that Rashmi is not from IIM Bangalore, but she's from IIM Ahmedabad. She's our competitor on the Western Front, a rival on the Western Front, not a competitor. But she's made up for it by marrying an alumnus. So, and I'm from IIMB. So,
IIM Bangalore was the only one which did not give me a final admission.
Oh no! I tell you, we should go back and look at our admissions processes more carefully. We seem to not. Anyway, so I'm going to start off with this first question. Do you want to say something to begin with, Rashmi, before I start asking my questions?
No, my pleasure to be here. And for the first few years after being an entrepreneur, when the press used to ask me, and they used to do a lot of stories about women entrepreneurs, I used to hesitate. I was like, I don't want to go and answer questions about work-life balance and family and how do I manage this. I want to talk about my business. But I realized that so many women need support. They need to talk to fellow entrepreneurs, and I think all of us need to grow our tribe. So I think I'm very thrilled to be here today. And yeah, I think happy to jump in. How do we make more women entrepreneurs and make them more successful?
Great. Thanks for being here, Rashmi. Before I get into the first question, I must confess I forgot to add a couple of things. Rashmi has received a number of awards and recognition. The ones that I found more significant, that's clearly my choice. Fortune 40 under 40, twice in a row, 2018-19. Is that right?
I'm not sure. So
okay, right. I can understand. Okay, ET Prime Women Entrepreneur of the Year, and then the Facebook Women Ahead Award. Those are the more interesting ones I found in that list that I came across. Anyway, my first question, we all want to hear your story as a woman entrepreneur, but just to sort of set the context, can you tell us what made you turn to entrepreneurship from a corporate career? Most MBAs are known to look for corporate careers. That trend is changing, but what made you turn to entrepreneurship? And then how did you hit upon the idea of Freshmenu?
Sir, I think when I had started career with sales, and first 5 years were pretty much sales in large corporates. One, I was itching to do something different, something more challenging every day. And the first thing I did was, instead of starting up, I joined a startup. And those 3 years, I think, were very, very exciting because I was solving a new problem every day. And what I realized is I like that situation more than a structured path and an annual goal and working towards a very set model. That's I think the starting point of feeling that yes, entrepreneurship seems like an option. I did try it. That idea did not work. I closed the startup, but I think very motivated to think of building a new business, think of ideas, think of solving problems. I think that's the starting point. Obviously, the other usual that be your own boss and make a lot of money. But I can tell you, being an entrepreneur does not solve for any of that. It genuinely solves for making impact, changing a lot of problems in the world that we live in, building a new business. I think creating a lot of employment. I think those are things that drive me today. But yeah, I think early on it was problem solving and challenge day to day was really the driver to think of entrepreneurship.
And where did you hit upon this idea of Freshmenu, or how did you hit upon that idea?
So when you're working at startups, I think a general corridor conversation is also what are the new ideas, what is buzzing, what's happening in the US, what is happening in China. I think Freshmenu is an idea. Basic idea came from what was happening around the world at that point of time. A lot of people were dabbling with mobile first food businesses. And that seemed like, a real missing block in India. In India, I think delivery food was pretty much non-existent apart from Domino's. We didn't have apps where you could order in food and food would show up at your office or at home easily. A lot of options were available only in restaurants, were not open for delivery. So I think it seemed like, one idea that you could work on. We decided to do Freshmenu the way it is today. I think a couple of big pillars. It was clearly mobile first. It was delivery only. We did not want to confuse ourselves to be a QSR, a restaurant, and also a delivery business. We focused on global food versus Indian food, easy to make a brand on products that people don't see every day. It was a differentiated product offering. So some of the things that we solved for and made like a very exciting business, stronger unit economics on this side of the business, and rest is history. I think delivery food is only growing from strength to strength every year.
But the idea of having your own menu, doesn't that add a layer of risk that might probably have been avoided if you had taken some other route?
No, I think if you notice, I think India, the biggest challenge is that we do not have brands in food space. Mostly we have global QSR, so these are global companies. We don't have homegrown brands in foods. We have some legacy players, but very city specific or just standalone stores. So I think there was a real opportunity to think of very scalable food business in India. making your own brand and having a full stack business model clearly gives you more margins. And that's the starting point.
Right. Anyway, it seems to have worked out very well for you, but I'm sure if I had been a VC at that time, I would have been kind of tearing my hair to figure out, does it really make sense to have your own menu and your brand, which must have been a fairly gutsy decision at that time, I'm sure, right?
Yeah. I think it always is, and especially food as a business.
Yeah. So just tell us some very memorable or significant moments, just as an entrepreneur, and then we'll go to this challenge that you faced as a woman entrepreneur.
So, sir, some of the interesting ones are, how do you recruit your first set of employees in a new business, right? A domain where you don't have expertise on, you don't know yourself very well. And I have some very memorable stories of how I hired the first chef and how I hired the first delivery boy. And Freshmenu started 8 years back, and there was no delivery, services or delivery options available. So we pretty much created a lot of these things from scratch. How did we, figure out packaging for food? Like, obviously, you could cook the food, but to pack it well and to not have spillage and deliver it in a condition that is great for a customer. I know that, the early days, there was a lot of work on product, delivery, the tech side of, how would you collect orders? What would you promise to customers? How will you be fast? How do you resolve problems? So I think initially very interesting stories. I can tell you the first delivery boy recruitment, we ordered from, I think one of the few people who used to deliver at that point of time, don't want to name the company. And when the delivery boy came, we told him, you just sit here, now you'll work with us. It was pretty much, he kind of kidnapped the delivery boy and started the business.
It's poaching at its worst, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think when you're very hungry to start your own business, this is what you do. So these are stories. I think the initial success on our product was so huge and so fast. It was very thrilling to kind of scale very, very rapidly, very, very quickly. I've also seen tough times. The last 3 years have been very, very tough. 2 years of COVID and 1 year before that. We've faced humongous challenges. And I think every challenge teaches you a lot as an entrepreneur and as a business. So no regrets of being around here. I think there's a lot of learning which no other job or no other kind of work would have given.
Now to the main which is the theme of this summit. How has your journey been different as a woman entrepreneur, or how do you think it could have been different if you had been a male entrepreneur instead of being a woman entrepreneur?
So I think being an entrepreneur itself is pretty hard, whether you're a male entrepreneur or a female entrepreneur. I think both, it's a very, very tough job to be an entrepreneur. It's very lonely, very, very stressful, very thrilling, very, very high learning, but it is a tough role. I think women entrepreneurs face a lot more than what a male entrepreneur would face. Especially from building the team point of view, like how do you convince people, how do you recruit people, how do you retain a team, build a team. There's social conditioning that pushes CEOs, especially in the domain, for example, where I am. Food is pretty much a male-dominated industry in India, and it's difficult for a woman entrepreneur to kind of establish in this domain. Fundraising, I think the kind of questions that women do get asked in meetings, not always, but it's always, I think you have to go through a higher stress test on the system to be fundraising and to be really, painting your vision out there. A part of it is also who you are, right? Like as an individual, I think a lot of women are conditioned to be more realistic, to be more conservative, to not burn money, to not state their ambition very, very clearly, to not come across as very, very aggressive. I think a lot of it goes in your head all the time. And I think it does play against the women entrepreneurs.
Would you be open to sharing your own way of dealing with some of these challenges?
Yes, love to. And the whole bunch of things that I think starts with women solving for one, I think family support, letting everybody know what you're planning to do, how are you doing it. I think family support becomes very, very critical. I think getting your family, friends to rally behind you, to support you is super important. how do you manage your time? And I think as an entrepreneur, that your time is always stretched, like buying as much help as possible. For example, finding help, nanny, driver, any other services that you could use to make your life easier as an individual, as a family. For women, I think it's super critical to reduce the guilt that I'm not being a good mother, I'm not being a good wife, I'm not being a good homemaker. Take it out of the window. Reduce as much guilt tripping that goes around, when a lot of outside world could question, you're not able to juggle both the worlds very well, or I think help could easily solve for a lot of small things in life, which is one thing, my advice to anyone who's trying to start up. Other simple thing, for example, which I think is an advice for all entrepreneurs: not be under debt when you're starting out, have savings, that you're not under financial stress. I think another big advice for women entrepreneurs is, I think, being confident in your own self, own personality. I think a lot of women usually, at least I know that, a lot of times I was trying to be somebody else. You're not comfortable with who you are, what is your ability, how good you are, or even to state how good you are at your work. And at times you try to be somebody else. That's something that I think building a team of like if you could associate with some mentors, advisors, somebody with whom you could really build on what is the character of and who do you want to be, and be comfortable with that. I think that's another piece of advice that I think goes a long way in solving for a lot of conflict within the team, within your own self. You're constantly at loggerheads with what you like to do, but what you're doing or how you're doing it. Some of the others would be, I think, okay, for example, when you go for fundraise and when you go for pitching, and some of the hacks that have worked for me is on those days, simple things like don't look at your customer complaints and don't look at your ops issues, because when you're really solving for today and the challenges in your business, and on the other side in the meeting you're supposed to paint a vision of what's going to happen in this industry, why are you the disruptor in the industry, why capital would really help you scale very fast, how you would be the breakout company in this sector. I think a lot of those questions need a lot more strategy and a lot more vision and conviction, which you can't do if you're very stuck in your day to day. So I think fundraising itself is a full-time job. For a lot of founders, if they could have complementary teams or co-founders who take care of your day-to-day, that the current business is running, you're not, and somebody else is really pitching on the fundraising and pitching on the success for future, solving problems for the future or strategy for the future. So I think those are some of the things that are my learnings that really help women entrepreneurs succeed.
One question in the previous session that was put to Anisha. Are you there? Rashmi, are you there?
I'm there.
Yeah, okay. Suddenly your screen vanished. So there was a question that was put to Anisha, and I thought that's a question that I might want to ask you as somebody who's been through the fundraising journey. And the question was, if you know that there is a gender bias, or if you sense that there's a strong gender bias among the VCs that you're speaking with, let's say there's a particular VC institution, the people across the table, you sense a gender bias. How does a woman entrepreneur first cope with that, and two, at the same time, it's a real challenge. You're talking to a set of people who don't believe in you, who are not bought into you as a prospective investee entrepreneur, right? How do you convince them? How do you sort of help them, get around that bias and convince them that you are as good a bet as any other male entrepreneur on a given day?
So I think it's tough because a lot of times the bias is subtle. It's not in your face. Right. Nobody will walk up to you and talk to you in a meeting and say, hey, I don't want to support you because you're a woman. Right? I think it could mean in questions. For example, I know if you go to them with, let's say you're doing 100 orders a day, they'll say, hey, come to me when you do 1,000 orders a day. And when you start doing 1,000 orders a day, they come to me when you do 10,000 orders a day, right? Proof of scale. So I think there are easy ways to kind of push through. And women do not end up seeking that, hey, what would change between 100 to 1,000 orders? Like if you're convinced about the vision, we should talk about money now and try to close a deal now than later. But I think the cues are subtle. I think the only way is human to human. Can you really build the relationship, or can you, do things or demonstrate behavior or demonstrate your pitch, make your numbers work, and all you need is one investor and one pitch to be successful for your fundraise to convert. But I think most of the times it's very subtle and it's hard to kind of, go around it.
Just two last questions. I know it's 4:25 and I want to leave time for the audience. One is, to what extent have you drawn on your family support, and in what way? Because you referred to the need to sort of set aside this guilt of not being a good enough mother, spouse, etc., etc. So to what extent did you draw on your family? The second, slightly larger picture question, which is that, there is this other woman entrepreneurship, if I may refer to it as that, where what my colleague Suresh would refer to as livelihood-based entrepreneurship as opposed to opportunity-based entrepreneurship, and which is not the tech-savvy female entrepreneur building an e-commerce-based business sort of thing, right? So do you have any thoughts on how we might, so what I'm trying to get at in a somewhat clumsy way is, can we look at entrepreneurship not just as confined to this tech-savvy, urban, higher education, led entrepreneurship? What do we need to do as a society in order to spread this idea broader into a broader, deeper sense?
Sir, I think one of the biggest changes starts with families. And I know there are a lot of families who are now very, very happy that their girls are getting very educated. But the moment it comes to marriage and working after marriage or working after kids, there are a lot of conditions, preconditions, or constraints, right? And the moment families are well off, they're like, why do you want to work? We don't need the money. And women don't want to work only for money. Women want to work because, as an individual, I want to build my career. I want to have my identity. So I think a lot of conditioning at the family level, especially beyond education. I think 25 years back, probably the hurdle was, would girls get enough education? Today, I think we're past that hurdle in a lot of families, but not ready to work, take risk, allow them the failure. Like as an entrepreneur, I think a lot of women may not want to start up despite having the capability, because they'll be told if you fail, your life is over. You can't restart a job, you can't restart another thing, or you'll be a nobody, which I think in today's environment, I think entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial ability is being rewarded across the spectrum. So I think that conditioning is probably the biggest change that we can make as a society.
And my other question about the support you got from your family, to what extent did you have to draw on them, and what are the ways in which they supported you?
Oh, massively. I think the biggest thing that family supports on is your time availability is really short. You are 24 hours occupied with your business and you're not there as a family. So I think everybody is making a lot of sacrifice. You do not have usual holidays. You're working on your holiday. You're working on Sunday, especially in the kind of business that we set up. So I think families have to agree to a larger goal that, yes, this is what works for you as an individual, and this is all of us are signing up for. For example, my daughter went to daycare. My daughter's grown up to be a more independent kid, but I think it comes at some price of you not being available all the time. But I think both of us, I think that's the kind of alignment. At the times, for example, at some of those emotional times we discuss, Mom, you're never around. I said, okay, I can quit and I can be with you. It's like, no, you can't quit. And, I love the fact that you're running a company. So I think we will have to go through the tough times together. But I think as a family, if you stick around, sacrifices are made by everyone. But if when you're starting out and the family is not sure and you're not all together, you've not kind of gone through it in terms of discussion, it could land up into a lot of conflict that, who's going to bear the brunt of time not being there and your mind space not being there.
Right. Okay, I think I need to really turn over to the audience questions. Do you get to see them or shall I read them for you?
I am not
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let me, so the first one is an interesting one. It's not so easy for someone who is not from a premium background to get in front of the right kind of investors. How do they break in? That's the question.
That's a very tough one. I think Indian ecosystem, startup ecosystem remains this very IIT, IIM, checkbox driven.
Right.
I think you have to hustle more, you have to network more, like you'll have to do more than what the IIT, IIM background people have to do. That's the reality.
Okay. So here's another question. I'm not sure how easy it is, but limiting myself to those questions that are somewhat interesting and challenging. What returns do investors usually expect? And if expected returns are not met, do they withdraw capital?
No, these are equity investments. Withdrawing capital is not truly an option. But I think investors expect the moon, right? Investor expect you to be a unicorn. Investor expect you to be a breakout company. Investor expect you to be, really leading the sector. So I think expectations are always huge from any investment that they make. Withdrawing capital is not usually what you've seen in the market.
But having said that, if I may extend that question a little bit, there have been situations when investors commit, let's say, X million dollars in tranches, let's say $6 million in tranches. And either the market turns or the enterprise itself runs into some headwinds.
Yeah.
Newspapers carry stories about investors, cutting back on their commitment or asking entrepreneurs, even compelling entrepreneurs to sort of return the unutilized cash in the balance sheet and so on.
I think it's better that when you do the original deal, try to do a clean, straight deal. So all the money comes together instead of, being on milestone or tranches. I think it's easier said than done, but I think that's the easier way to kind of guarantee what money is in your bank and what plans can it work for.
Okay, so here is someone who clearly wants to pick your brains on the food delivery business. I'll read it out for you.
I think we could leave probably the domain kind of questions. No, I don't think they kind of help.
You would prefer not to answer them?
Yeah.
Or would you like to hear the question and then take a call? Whatever you're comfortable with.
No, we can move to, I think, the other questions. We can come back to this later.
Okay, right. So there's a question. So we are at 4:31. I want to sort of limit it to the last two questions. If an entrepreneur does not have the funds to run a pilot, is there any ways to overcome that?
I think you have to raise around with friends, family. You have to cobble up the money to start off, have an MVP. I think that's the hustle. That's the tough starting point, is the toughest point. Okay.
So probably the last question for this evening, unless of course, the organizers want me to extend the session, but otherwise we are kind of running behind by a minute now. But let me just ask this one last question. You probably answered it before. It's about how do you manage work-life balance? And there was a related question, which was, what were the initial hurdles you faced and how did you overcome some of them?
So I think the work-life balance, and I think that's a very typical question that gets asked only of women. But see, I think it's not a standard life. It's not the usual life that, for example, what your parents led or what you see in the standard life format. But I think you juggle both home and work, and you work longer hours. But that's the fun. So I think there's no balance is not the right word. It's basically you go through both.
Right. Yeah. No. So I think in the absence of any further instruction from the organizers, I'm going to sort of take the prerogative of concluding this session. Rashmi, really, thank you very much. I know what it is to run a company that has raised a Series D. You raised a Series D last, right?
We are raising a Series C now.
Series C, yeah. So, and that's really a time when you as founder are completely stretched. So thank you for taking time off in the midst of that. And I'm grateful to you on behalf of NSRCEL and myself. There is a question, couple of questions directed to me on valuation. I will decline to answer that, not because I don't want to, but I think this session is all about you and your journey as a woman entrepreneur. I don't want to
valuation also, I think a simple thing, valuations are driven by demand and supply in the market.
Right. So thank you for answering that. And that's probably the best answer I could have given. notwithstanding all the models that we have for valuation.
Models will obviously give you some formula, but
Yes.
eventually it's demand and supply, right? So
yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think it's difficult for people at first brush to accept that harsh reality, that the valuation you get.
And it's not like, hey, my competitor got valued
Exactly.
10 times and I should be valued 10 times. It does not work like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think coming from you, it obviously sounds a lot more credible than it would come from me. Okay, I want to close this. With an anecdote about something I read in a book by Alan Rosling. He wrote a book on Indian VC. It's called Boom Country, right? And it talks about a very successful entrepreneur. I don't want to mention the name. He has mentioned the entrepreneur. It's a quote that he has from the entrepreneur, where he talks about what I found a pretty unsavory experience that the woman entrepreneur had with a VC, in terms of the kind of conversation the first meeting was sort of moving in, the direction in which that conversation was moving in. I think it's one of the many anecdotes I'm sure people have, which talk about how we still have a long way to go in terms of, I mean, there's a lot of data. Your Story published a survey in 2020. Bain had a report in 2019 on all these issues. There's lots of data, and all of them point only to one thing. It's at best a glass that's half full. There are positive signs. There are women entrepreneurs going into tier 2, tier 3 cities, more women entrepreneurs in technology, which was previously considered the domain of men, exclusive domain of men. But on the other side, there are also these kind of anecdotes that I mentioned. And, the Bain story points out that by 2030, 400 million women will be joining the workforce, right? That's a huge, huge number. And if that is anything to go by as a starting place, as a starting point, I think we haven't even scratched the surface when it comes to realizing the potential of women entrepreneurs. So NSRCEL has been a big votary, a big believer in women entrepreneurship. The number of things that NSRCEL, and I am biased because I am associated with it. I was responsible for NSRCEL till not very long ago. And throughout, it's even before my time, even after my time, the center has been a big believer in entrepreneurship. This summit is yet another example of the amount of the length that NSRCEL is willing to go to support that cause, to support that movement, if you like. And so I want to end this on a positive note. Hopefully there'll be a lot many more NSRCELs, a lot many more Rashmi Dagas, and there'll be a lot many more women entrepreneurs, a lot many more VCs, women VCs. And so hopefully in the next 10 years, we'll see a lot more realization of that potential. I want to stop on that optimistic note. Thank you very much, Rashmi, for joining us. Thank you, NSRCEL, for having Rashmi and me on this program.
Thank you.